Stream here.
Here we go.
Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast on a Thursday. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and I'm very pleased tonight to have on the show a man I've known for quite some time, a man who has had a multifaceted career in professional wrestling, somewhat by happenstance, which we'll get into, but a man who is perhaps best known as a ring announcer for ECW, the original ECW, and has also been involved in a number of other projects we'll touch on, most recently MLW, and is in fact returning to MLW to do ring announcing duties in Philadelphia on July the 8th. And that man would be Stephen DeANGELIS. Stephen, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Jack, for having me. I appreciate it.
I wanted to start off with, before we get into some of the details of your experiences, what we usually do in terms of career retrospectives is ask the question, were you a fan of the business growing up? Did you have particular wrestlers that you followed? But I understand you had a different path, and if you could let the fans know that, I'm sure they'd be interested.
It was very interesting. I was aware of wrestling because it was on every Saturday morning in New York, and I grew up in New England, so it was there. I watched wrestling here or there, and it was interesting because I come from Rhode Island originally, and they had built a new Providence Civic Center. And so I went to the Civic Center when I was in high school thinking, well, I want the announcer's job for the building. I want to do the hockey games, like the PA announcer. And then I could also do the wrestling and boxing when they were there, and do the college basketball lineup intros. And I was very disappointed. The guy who was the building manager met with me and said, "Oh, well, we have a guy who's coming from the old building for the basketball and hockey, but the ring announcers travel with the show for wrestling and boxing. The promoter provides them." So I was like, "Okay, that was a nice idea, but that's not in the cards, obviously." And then years later, by trade, I'm a casting director. Mm-hmm. And in about the middle of my career, do you remember a Miller Lite campaign with Bob Uecker for Lightomania? It was a takeoff on WrestleMania.
Absolutely, I do.
So I used to do all the Miller Lite commercials, so I got hired to cast the Lightomania commercials. So I did tons of research, and I was the one who got Vince involved. I don't know if you remember Danny Davis, the crooked referee.
Dangerous Danny Davis, yes.
I cast Danny Davis when Bob Uecker had to go under the hood. Danny Davis was his stunt double, because they were similar bills and types and stuff. And I booked Wayne Newton, I booked Liberace, and I always joke that Vince got his ideas for doing crazy celebrities from the Lightomania more than from his WrestleMania. So I had tons of research and tons of wrestling magazines that I had sent my assistant out to get, like stacks and stacks. Let me see if I can do the shorter version. So the agency had the Starlight Foundation, which was created around the same time as the Make-A-Wish Foundation in New York. And they had them as a pro bono client. So I got involved with them because they had an emergency with talent the night of their gala. And literally I wound up finding a bunch of celebrities to perform that night when the celebrity who was scheduled got sick and couldn't do it. So they said, "Well, we want to get you more involved." And I said, "Sure, next year we'll plan." A couple of weeks later, I get a call, and we had been talking about what I had done with the wrestling stuff. And they said, "We have a wrestling Ready to Wish in Philadelphia, and they've called the WWE, F at the time, and asked about these wrestlers, and they were told there's no professional wrestlers by that name." And of course, that meant that they worked for the NWA. I said, "Well, I know who those guys are. I see them in the magazines." So this is about 4:00 on a Friday. So I nose around and I find out, okay, when are they coming back? Because the family, the child who was ill lived in Philly. So I went and checked and found out that they were at the Philadelphia Civic Center that night. And then this Philadelphia, the arena was undergoing renovation. So it wasn't happening again until fall. And the kid's life expectancy wasn't that long. They had actually sent him home in a hospital bed to spend his last days with his family in a very poor section of Philly. So I was like, well, I'm going to try to figure out how to make this work. So I found out the next show was the next night and Saturday. So if it didn't happen that day, it wasn't going to happen at all. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go. I'm going to take the train to Philadelphia. I'm going to put on a suit. I'm going to take a train to Philadelphia, and I'm going to figure out a way to get backstage and figure out if there's a way to do this thing. So I got there. I called the family from the terminal, the train terminal, the Amtrak station, and said, hi, I'm here. I'm going to try to do this. Then I opened the Yellow Pages, and I called every limo company I could find to see who would donate a limo and a driver for me. So they donated this guy who owned the company said, I'll do it for you. So he picked me up in a white stretch limo, and we go to the Civic Center. And my gamble is that they're not going to stop a white stretch limo at the gate. They're going to wave it through because they think it's somebody. Mm-hmm. So I went through the gates. I got out. I'm at my attaché case. I'm in a 3-piece suit. Everyone's like, who the hell is that guy? I hear the whisper says, I don't know, but he came in a white stretch limo. He must be somebody. So I go backstage. No one's stopping me at all. and the clock is ticking. And I'm talking to several people. And there was someone there on the promotional end. And I'm not going to embarrass him, though I wish I could and would, because he promised he would help me. But then he ghosted me and disappeared the whole rest of the night. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do? This isn't going to happen. And I saw J.J. Dillon. And I walked up to J.J. and I said, here's the deal. I worked everybody to get backstage. I'm here. Can you help me? And so the guys in the opening match, Kendall Windham, Tim Horner, Brad Armstrong were in the opening match. So it was a 6-man. And they happened to be on this kid's list of who he was fans of. So JJ went up to them and said, don't change out of your clothes. Just grab your luggage and head out with this guy. And he said to me, all you have to do is you have to get them to the airport because they're taking a charter after the show because they had a live TBS show the next morning where they were going to win the tag belts. So they have to be on that plane. So I went to the family, show up with the wrestlers. The kid is delighted, shares the experience with his family. I wound up sleeping on that family's couch because I didn't want to spend the charity's money putting me up in a hotel, and then watched the next morning, watch television when Brad and Tim won the tag belts, and they're screaming. They told him, we're going to wrestle for the belts and we're going to win these belts for you tomorrow morning. So they're at the camera going, Troy, these are your belts, Troy. And the announcers are not clued in at all. So like, who's Troy? Do they have a new manager? They're trying to figure out what's going on. And then, thank God we did it when he did, because 8 days later, the child passed. Mm-hmm. So that sort of made me a little more aware of the whole wrestling thing. Mm-hmm. And then I got asked to put together a celebrity softball game for Starlight. And there was a radio host named John Orezi in New York. I was driving late at night and tripped across his radio show. Mm-hmm. So Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Yep. So I found him and said, can you help me get some wrestlers? Because it was the springtime and all the baseball players were in spring training or whatever. And the football players were all out of town because it's off season. So he got me a whole bunch of New York area wrestling personalities mixed in with Ashley Montana from the Sports, who was the Sports Illustrated cover girl at the time, Kelly Ripa when she was just starting on All My Children, and a woman named Laura Wright, who's now on General Hospital, who was on a soap called Loving, who I knew. And so I mixed the thing up. But the most interesting thing is that on the team was Paul Heyman. Paulie Dangerously agreed to play on the celebrity softball team. And so he played the first couple of innings, and then he went and did live play-by-play. And I think it's the only time he may have ever done play-by-play for something that wasn't wrestling. But he was great. At some point I'll see if I can find the photos and scan them for you, because you would probably find them interesting. Because he had his very his hot pink jacket that said "Paulie Dangerously" on the back, and it was so I became friendly with Paul, and then Paul did a lot of things under the radar for charity. I know it would ruin his image then and maybe even now, but we had an event in Las Vegas for the World Nintendo Championships to have Nintendo units put over kids' beds who were seriously ill to distract them from their pain and their medication. So it was the World Nintendo Championships, and Paulie hosted it, and Jake the Snake Roberts and his wife Cheryl came. It was right after Jake got fired by WCW when he was out of rehab, and they came, and he managed the American Kid, and Terry Funk and his wife came to Vegas. And I spent a week with these guys in Vegas. Can you imagine the hotel? So and with Terry and his wife, and Terry managed the Japanese Kid. And so we did the whole tournament, the press, and the whole thing. And so I became friendly with Paul and Terry and those guys through that. Paul invited me down to Philadelphia. I was all at all the early ECW shows, and I would get calls like the day there was that Public Enemy Bad Company Shark cage match with the exploding cage that didn't quite happen. That day, I get a call from Paul because he had arranged for a cage, and the guy who was supposed to extend the cage got a better offer and took it and said, "Sorry, you're out of luck." So he's like, "What do I do? How do I build a cage? Do you know someone to build a cage?" I said, "Well, Paul, let's get a shark cage from somebody on the Jersey Shore." So that's where if you look at the cage, that's what it is. It's a shark cage. And of course, we didn't count on a security officer stepping in the bowl of explosives, and that's why it puffed. It would have been a big, beautiful explosion if he hadn't knocked half the explosive powder off and hadn't played with the wires. So I'll make this quick, I promise. So then I would go to the shows in Philly, and I drove with Paul. I drove down with Tommy a bunch of times. I was at a lot of the shows. And then I was at a show in Staten Island, and Bob Ortiz, the regular ring announcer from Philly's car broke down. And in New York, there was a curfew, and you had to finish your matches by 11, and they were taping TV. And I was there with a bunch of Wish families at a thing called Sports Fest in Staten Island. And so I was in a suit. Paul's like, "You just got to throw you out there." He said, if they boo you, they boo you because they don't know you. But I just got to get through it. And if you're horrible, I'll edit the ring announcements off the show. So I got out. They booed me mercilessly. There was a guy. I don't know if I told the story to the interview in Australia, but there was a guy in the front row, and I'll clean my language up, who was screaming, "Ring announcer, I effed your mother," at me.
Very ECW-like.
Very ECW-like. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy's going to get tossed out by Atlas Security. And when they toss him out, the crowd is going to turn on me and think I got him tossed out. So I thought, okay, I got to figure out what to do. So every chance he gets, he's screaming this. So I get into the ring, and they would kept just sending me out little pieces of paper with the information on who was next and who was coming out next and whatever. So I got into the ring, and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen," and I paused, knowing that he would say it, scream it. So I said, "Everyone excuse me." And so I went to the front guardrail, and I said, "Did you have something you want to say to me?" And I put the mic right in his face. And in the mic, he yelled, "I effed your mother." And I turned to him and said, "Dad, you're drunk. Go home." And then turned around, went to the ring, and he got a huge pop.
Then you're over.
Right? The rest of the night, because then I was over. And so when I came through, Paul was like, "I want to use you as much as I can. You're so quick. You know how to diffuse the situations, and because of your theatrical background, you have improv ability. Do you want to do this more?" I was like, "Listen, when you need me, you let me know when you need me." So I would do the New York shows because a big trek for Bob, and I love Bob and Lex Ortiz, and they have been nothing but kind and gracious to me, and I have always felt like I was a guest in Bob Ortiz's and Lex's home, being able to do that because they were so lovely to the locker room and gracious to everybody. And then Bob managed an ice skating rink. So when they were in peak season, he couldn't make dates in Philly. And so Paul said, hey, can you come to Philly and do the dates? And that's how I wound up doing more and more and more as Bob wound up getting more involved. But that was basically it. I always felt like, I was fortunate to be there. I continued to do it because it allowed me to have more direct contact to the locker room or someone who knew someone in another locker room. If, I very often in music too, and in acting, you get a call going, hey, we have a child with 72 hours left to live and he wants to meet so-and-so. So, a lot of things happen on weekends and evenings. And so I thought, well, I need to do this because it keeps me to be able to figure out a way, as they say, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but you can figure out who knows who worked with who. I have people's phone numbers. I can call them directly. They won't be pissed at me if I call them 1 o'clock in the morning. They're probably up anyway. And so that was my main reason for staying in it. It wasn't really for me thinking I was going to have, it wasn't my career, but it served a purpose and I could do something good with it. And so I continued to do it and I was the original ROH ring announcer for the first year and a half. And so I always stayed around it just because those wishes were really magical. When you think, first of all, it was very humbling for the guys because they're thinking this kid's can wish for anything and they want me. And then also, it gives the family relief because the family's seeing their kid not in terms of the illness anymore. For that one period of that time for the when the visit's happening, they get their kid back. And it gives them a memory of their kid smiling and laughing and happy. And that's especially important when you deal with siblings who may be too young to understand all the attention the older relative is getting. So it really helped it was a quality of life issue. And I always felt like the wishes were as much for the entire family as they were for the wish child. And so I continue to do it. And I still go to shows that I'm not on necessarily just because, if there's someone who I haven't seen in a while, I'll go visit them just to acknowledge them because they've been helpful in the past to me or whatever. But, every once in a while, I was happy to do the WW, ECW one night stands things. And that was interesting,
We'll get into that, but I think you make a very salient point, and that's, we've heard about the the great charitable work that John Cena has done, but we hear about professional wrestling as being a very cutthroat business, et cetera. But what doesn't get the press is just how many great quality human beings there are.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because the Starlight Foundation specifically, as opposed to Make-A-Wish, guards the secrecy and the identity of the wishes in the family. Like, you don't have to sign a piece of paper that says, in order to get this wish, you have to agree to use you for publicity. Mm-hmm. So, and that was always an attraction to me because it made the child's experience the most important thing. And not that, listen, I wish there's never going to be enough good causes to help enough people. But I was always very inspired because you could get people to do things because they knew it was really personal. You get people who, because there's no press. I'll give you just a quick example. But before his accident, jumping with his horse, as far as I know, I'm the only person who ever got Christopher Reeve to put the Superman shirt on again for a wish. And that wasn't, he's passed, his wife has passed. And I feel like I can talk about him because he was a terrific guy and he had said he would never put the shirt on. But when I asked him, he couldn't say, he knew his privacy would be respected. And so he did it. So I think the guys were that way too, in terms of, so, I mean, there were kids who were fans of the heel, but they
Mhm.
were worried about whether or not they could actually do the wish, until I assured them that this was a private event for the child and the family. And then I had a lot of people, and I'm very grateful for them.
You spent some time in ECW during the salad days, the most vaunted,
Mhm.
almost mythological status days of the company.
Mhm.
Do you have any favorite? And sorry, we all hear about the atmosphere in the locker room and the craziness that was going on there, and some of the antics of the wrestlers there. Do you have any favorite locker room anecdotes
I'm listen, I'm an old fashioned guy. I don't drink to excess. I don't party. I would have cramped their style if I had gone out partying with them afterwards. It just would have been like, it's not a fit. I'll come in, I'll shake everyone's hand, I'll be polite, I'll show them the due respect. But they have their world, and they shouldn't worry about whether or not someone fits there. The only time we had a very funny thing used to happen on the road is we'd be on the road, and we were in Georgia. We were in Marietta, Georgia. We did TV taping at Center Stage in Atlanta, and then we were doing a pay-per-view in Marietta. And so we were at Abdullah the Butcher's house of ribs and Chinese food for lunch. And they're like, DeANGELIS, you're coming out with us tonight. You never go out. I was like, okay. And they said, you know what? We're in Marietta, Georgia. And everywhere I would go, I would invariably see people I know in the airport. Somehow, they're like, but we're in Marietta, Georgia. It's not Philadelphia. It's not New York. It's not Miami. It's not Orlando. It's not Fort Lauderdale. Marietta. They said, if you know someone in Marietta, Georgia, the entire locker room will get up and bow to you. So it's like, okay, I'm thinking, okay, this is over, and I'm. So they want to go out. They go out to a strip club. So I'm like, okay, cool. So we go, and we're there. So as we're going in, I go to the restroom, and I see this dancer, and I said, hey, listen, I need your help on something. Here's $20. I'm with that group of guys over there. If you happen to be dancing for somebody nearby, when you're dancing, giving the guy a lap dance, when you turn around, all you have to do is look at me and say, Steven, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in New York? So sure as hell, and half an hour passes, she comes by, Steven, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in New York? I look around the locker room, they're like, they all got up and bowed. And as they were bowing, I gave her another $20 over their head. They never saw it. And I finally told a couple of the guys eventually. I said, you remember that time in Marietta? And that was the only time I ever, I don't have a ribs. Thank God I was never ribbed. Actually, I was ribbed once, but then it wasn't horrible. They were testing to see if I was a member of the team. And I went and did. And so I felt like I ribbed them. We're in Poughkeepsie. And I go into this room, and it was when I started to do more full time. And Bubba and Devon take me into this little room, and they're like, "Okay, listen, we're gonna give you 3D. We're gonna give you 3D." I'm like, "Okay." I try. What do I do? I'm not especially athletic. I love playing softball, but so what do I do? They said, don't worry, we'll take. I said, listen, I trust you guys. I trust Mick Foley. I trust Terry. I said, whatever you need to do, I know you'll do everything within your power. Just tell me what I need to do to protect myself so I can help you do your job, and so it'll look great. And Devon went over to the door, opened the locker room door. The entire locker room was on the other side of the locker room, listening, eavesdropping to hear what I would say. Would I take a bump to help get somebody over?
That's a team player.
Well, but again, I kept thinking, they're gonna, when they tell Paul they want to put me, do 3D to a table, Paul's gonna say no, because he's the only ring announcer I have here.
Well, yes, very practical.
They're not gonna. So in my head, I'm thinking, I said, you know what? If I have to do it, I'll do it. But I bet you I won't have to be the one to say no to it. I bet you Paul's either going to be afraid for me, or he's going to realize that he needs someone to ring announce the main event.
And we definitely need.
But it wasn't even real. It was just a test, But I love those guys. I mean, I miss them. They're some of my favorite people in the world. I can't say enough nice words about Franny. Franny's the best. Francine's the best. Getting to travel with some of these guys was interesting. And you just develop relationships, even with, getting people. We'll talk about Hardcore Roadtrip later, but the guys who came up who were from the States knew me, and they knew that I had their best interests at heart creatively. So it was, that was a pleasure. It was an honor. It's an honor to be trusted by those guys.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
You discuss in some of the materials I've seen about the final days of ECW and the whole controversy around Paul, filming Rollerball, and then he's stiff in the company, and then he's on Raw, blah blah blah, and you have a different perspective on that the fans might be interested.
I have a real different perspective because I was a consultant as a casting director on Rollerball. Paul was not originally cast in Rollerball. It was all foreign language announcers. They did a test screening, and they found that the comment was that the English-speaking audience couldn't tell what was really going on. And so they had passed on Paul. They had called him back. He tested, but then they decided not to have that role. And then they did reshoots, but they did reshoots in Yonkers, New York, in the soundstage there. They took the set, they shipped it there, and he did reshoots there. So this whole idea that Paul was in Los Angeles and he wasn't really, and he was working on Rollerball as opposed to trying to get a deal with the company is categorically not true. Because if you check the dates of the shooting of the film, and you check the list, if you go to the International Movie Database, it lists all the locations where footage was shot, and the soundstage in Yonkers, New York is listed there. The exact dates of shooting in each is not there, but it does list the start date and the end, the end date, and then they obviously had the reshoots. So that as far as I'm concerned, that exonerated him. But once it gets out to the world of, oh, this is what I heard, and he had to do this, and he lied to us about he was doing Rollerball. He was not doing Rollerball. I know because I was the one who actually hooked him up with the William Morris agency at the time, and there was a pitch. I guess I'm not telling tales out of school. There was an idea to do, at the time, The Real World was big on MTV. It had just started, that TV series, and there was an idea to do a little bit more of a sort of documentary / more realistic version of ECW, where you had more behind the scenes footage as the issues between the guys, as opposed to going to people's homes and shooting at their. And William Morris was shepherding that whole idea. I got Paul signed to William Morris, and there was a creative guy, and he also at the time was they were in negotiations and pitching him to be a morning drive time host on radio in New York. And with the idea that he was the only guy with a big enough mouth to take on Howard Stern, and he could be equally, he would be at least as quick and equally as polarizing. So I made it, and the agent, I could tell you the agent was a guy named Jonathan Trumper, who now does internet research, and he was the first guy to really deal with audience demographics in terms of the influence of the internet on ratings and stuff, and he was a real pioneer too. So he saw something in Paul, and they tried to do it, and there just wasn't enough time. The idea was, if you say something's just like Real World, well, Real World, hadn't even done their first season yet, so they didn't have numbers on what that approach would be, what it would mean, and whether it was worth the investment or not. But I know Paul tried. I remember when I talked to Paul, and he would, meetings would get canceled, or there would be resistance by one person at network, and then when the guy came on to USA, and he was like, well, if I can't have, the number one company, we don't want to replace him with the number two company or the number three company. We just don't want it unless we have. And that sort of was the death knell. But I don't doubt that Paul tried everything. I really don't. And I've actually said that to some of the people who were critical of Paul. And I said, Paul, I have to tell you something. I said, I know you believe what you believe, and you may continue to believe it, but I have to tell you that because I have firsthand knowledge of his involvement into rollerball, because it was a casting director, was a friend of mine named Pat McCorkle, and she was the casting director for rollerball. And she asked me, did I know anybody? And she also asked me if I knew anybody who spoke foreign language sports announcers, which is how it came up. And then I said, if you need somebody over the top who speaks English, there's this guy, Paul Heyman. And that's how we got the initial audition.
So ECW closes, fast forward a number of years. We've got the resurgence, so to speak, of the tribute and the nostalgia shows. We had the hardcore homecoming shows in the ECW arena, and a lot of goodwill towards the brand. We had that awesome film by Borash, Forever Hardcore, et cetera, et cetera. So along these lines, under that backdrop, WWE decided to have their own one night stand, the original, and you were involved in that. Can you give the fans some insights as to? Sorry, this is a long-winded question, but
no, it's fine.
Your involvement there, how it came about, some of your
Dreamer called me and said, we're getting the band back together, and at least we'll get the Bon Voyage we never got for the fans, because they had done the Pine Bluff show, which I wasn't on. If I had known it was going to be the last show, I would have gotten myself there. But I was like, okay. So he said, so I thought, okay, this is a way to treat the fans and show our appreciation for the fans. And it was interesting because I have at my dad's house in Rhode Island, I have a copy of the original script. And the original script had the last line of the original written script was Vince turning to Paul and saying, gee, Paul, maybe ECW is not dead after all. They never shot that. It never happened that way. But any
idea why?
No, I just think Vince wanted to keep his more of his options open, and that was too much of a commitment to him. He wanted to see what the numbers were. But I remember going to Hammerstein. It was wonderful to see everybody. It felt authentic, which was great. And then subsequently, I wound up doing the next, the following year, the follow-up show. And it was great seeing everybody, but that was more towards the whole idea of them integrating and making it a third brand. And they didn't have I don't think they had the faith that the ECW guys could draw eyeballs. And so they wanted to have the Kurt Angles and the big shows and those guys get them involved. And that was not a wise thing for them. They didn't realize how loyal the original fans were, and they would see it as a betrayal, especially when you start jobbing out the guys that they cared about. The thing they needed more and they couldn't figure out was, why are the fans so invested and have such an emotional connection? And then they were crapping on that connection and telling them, you don't know what you're watching. Like, it doesn't matter. They care about the Sandman. It doesn't matter whether he's a great technical wrestler. That's not his relationship with them. That's not what he's there for. He's there to be one of them. It's like, listen, I know by design I mean, if I wanted to be much more polished, I would. But when I said to Paul, when Paul said, we want you to do this more regularly, I said, well, what do you want? And he said, you know the movie Scanners? I said, you remember the movie?
Yep,
Scanners?
very much so.
He said, I want you to be so jacked up in that ring that if we turned you up, the knob on your back up one more notch, your head would explode. He said, that's what I want. He said, I want you to be the most extreme announcer you can, largely because the way the matches flowed, if you let the audience down and you let them take a breath, they may not necessarily have the energy or the wherewithal to pop and be as involved in the next match. So it was my job to be the hype man. It wasn't about presenting as much as it was about seeming excited myself about what was coming next and transferring that. And so I always felt my job was to be more like the people on the other side of the railing than the people on the side of the railing in the ring where I was.
Yeah, definitely remember you as having that particularly unique style amongst ring announcers of no kind of the opposite of Buffer and WCW for sure.
I mean, I could do a traditional announcement. I just don't think it would be ECW.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and to the point where when I did the second show, I got a sense that they wanted me to be more traditional. And I said to Paul, what do I do? I have a responsibility. I feel like I have a responsibility to the audience to give them what they're expecting. And out of respect for the locker room, I need to give them what they're expecting. And Paul said to me, do what you feel. Do what you feel. And so I did what I felt. And, at the end of the night, I went out and Kevin Dunn was lovely to me and said, we'll see you Tuesday. He said, you booked on Tuesday, right? Absolutely. And then in the meantime, between Sunday night and Tuesday, a determination had been made that they were already paying Justin Roberts to show up at SmackDown tapings as a backup, and they were already paying somebody. So why did they need somebody? And he was younger. And so I showed up at the show, and I did the walk around. I said hello to everybody, and then they took me aside. And as they took me aside, they called for Justin to come to the ring, and I knew what was up. And I was like, okay. And the irony is that they had the Sci-Fi Network thing. I know I'm diverging all over the place, but I promise it'll make a point. So as a casting director, I have relationships. So I was in my head thinking, okay, they're going to be on Sci-Fi Network. Who do I know that I can help connect to bring eyeballs from sci-fi fans to the wrestling? Because I used to do that with Paul. I was the person, and if you want to talk about it later, I will. But I was the person who got Jenna Jameson to come to ECW twice.
Wow.
I was the person, and believe it or not, I got her to do it for free twice because I exchanged promotion for her website with her manager in exchange for it. And that for her was a big plus for her. She made so much money off the website subscriptions. It didn't matter what she did in the ring. When Divine Brown, the hooker that got caught with Hugh Grant,
mm-hmm.
I found somebody who found her in Los Angeles, and we flew her and her pimp to do that angle with Stevie Richards and Raven about who was going to be the skankiest person to be with Raven. So anytime they needed some sort of celebrity thing. So I was a very good friend since she was little with Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Had done the TV series.
Yep, for sure.
And she had just gotten married to Freddie Prinze, who ultimately wound up ironically involved in wrestling.
Yep.
So I said, and she would come to New York regularly. I said, hey, if I need, have you come to an event and we push whatever you're doing, would you do it? She's like, absolutely. So as I'm walking in the back, I'm walking with Laurinaitis back, and he's going to get me paid for the night and to get me the hell out of the building. And I said, you know, Mr. Laurinaitis, it's really a shame. And he said, well, you know, kid, this happens and stuff happens. I said, listen, this is not my career. That's fine. I said, the shame is for you guys. And he stopped. Said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you guys don't know this. I said, but, you know, I've cast over 3,600 network television commercials, you know, and as it turns out to my career now, I've hired over 100,000 performers, actors, and singers. So wow. I was like, I have connections I was willing to use. I said, and because you have Kevin Thorne doing the vampire thing, I said it would be interesting to have Sarah Michelle Gellar, who's a personal friend of mine, who is Buffy, sitting in the front row and have her come up and having him react to her like she's really to Sarah, like she's Buffy, and use it in the finish of a match, like to have so that he's off his game and then the face can beat him. And he says, "Oh my God, that's a great idea. Can we do it?" And he said, "Can we still do it?" I was like, "Well, not now." So why would I do it? Why would I call in a favor? You know, I said, it just was, I said, you just never know what someone can do for you. You just never know.
Which is also the other aspect of your involvement in the WWE ECW was the fact that, did they ever think that when they rolled out the TV show in Philly that it would have been a much better choice to have you there rather than crap all over the product?
Well, sure. I was see, the thing is, I was told by Tommy when they went to thing, they said, you know, as many shows as you can make, you're on. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Philly. I mean, I even said to them, I said, you guys should have me go to Philly and pass the torch to Justin. I said, if you're going to do it, let me do it and be a gentleman about it. And let's, you know, let me have my goodbyes with the Philly fans and let's do it. But they didn't, you know, but they were like, no, we're not going to finish that. But, you know, I even said to them as we were leaving, I said, you know, I'm just going to disappear. I said, you guys, I said to Laurinaitis, I said, you guys have a special effects truck. You should we're walking to the ring, I stop, and you beam me out like Star Trek and beam Justin Roberts in. You'll play the start, you'll get kudos from the sci-fi fans for being creative, and then it's entertaining. It's like, oh, they're saying it's a theme. And then they wouldn't come under the criticism that they came under, you know. But they were not. They were parameters under which they were working, and that was it. That's fine.
Well,
it worked out. It wasn't like I was gonna. The funny thing is in my deal with the ad agency, I had a certain number of days off. I could have a day off for a year and done the TV if they needed me to do it. Just didn't happen that way. It's fine. It's fine. I was sad to see that, you know, that they jobbed out people who shouldn't have been jobbed out, who I think should have had a chance to make more of a run. You know, I was sad that, you know, Axel Rotten, who was a great guy, couldn't get his act together enough to take advantage of their interest in him. That was sad because he deserved a break, and could have, you know, and he and Balls together could have done some fun stuff. They would have been like a modern day Bushwhackers, you know, kind of, you know, edgy, disheveled but relatable, you know, team. It was a shame. There were guys, you know, who were super athletes like Nova. I thought, okay, Nova's finally going to get his, and he didn't, you know. So you know, listen. There's not much I can do about it, you know. If except that I was proud of the work I did. I tried to contribute. I tried to give them, you know, I always gave people my best work, and contributed beyond the job that they hired me for if they needed it or wanted it, or I thought there was a way to benefit. And, you know, there were celebrities I could have had that were sci-fi related. They could have come into a singer who I knew sang because they had musical theater backgrounds, who could have come and done the national anthem at the ECW on Sci-Fi Show. I mean, any number of things, but, you know, that's not how they viewed me. They didn't see me that way, and it's fine. You know, the one thing I learned was what a fantastic two people, Francine and Jazz. They called me. Franny called me every day for weeks to see how I was. And then when they were in Philadelphia, Franny and Jazz called me together to check in on me. And then when they were at the Garden, they called to check on me. And periodically they would check on me. And I was like, you know what? I'm of no use to them. They're not working with me anymore. They have, they now have guaranteed contracts. They're on TV, whatever. But the fact that they cared enough to reach out to me, I will always appreciate that. I will always respect them as human beings, and they're exemplary in this business, and kind, and generous, and terrific. So.
Yeah, of which again there are a few in the industry, more than a few. One question that's always debated about the WWE ECW experiment, if you will, is was this a deliberate? As a fan, I couldn't figure it out. I knew something was off watching the product. When you see the ECW originals coming out, huge reactions. They could still go. Talking about like guys like you mentioned a few, but guys like Steven Richards, who was in the best shape of his career, just a phenomenal athlete, just at the
during and Roadkill, the FBI, all those guys,
all those guys and gals, and yet it seemed that they really didn't have faith in the product. The question I want to ask is, in conspiracy circles, a lot of folks figure, the ECW chants that wouldn't die. The strong fan support, love for the product. Vince took that as a personal affront and created this whatever you want to call it, ECW only in name, to neuter that. Is that your opinion as well?
I think that there are people, he had his circle around him, and there are people in his circle, and you can guess who they were, who, because the ECW guys didn't work the WWE style. And I don't think they wanted to show the fans that there was an alternative. So instead, they would have the agents say, don't do so much, do less. And then when the fans started chanting ECW, they told Vince, the reason they chant ECW, you taught them, Vince, to chant ECW. Because of the pay-per-views, you taught them how to do that. That's because of you. And so his perception of the athletes and their connection with the fans, listen, they couldn't figure out when ECW did that first invasion at Monday Night Raw, they couldn't figure out why they got to, like, people know who they were. I mean, they couldn't, and they also, I think, were jealous of that locker room atmosphere. I mean, everybody showed up in their matching tracksuits and the jackets, and they showed up like a team, and they acted like a team. And the locker room, and there was no issue of who was going over, how they were going over. It was for the benefit of the product. And I think there was jealousy, but I think there might have been more jealousy about that. The fact that the thing that Vince most wanted, he never could get. And not that he wasn't supportive financially of Paul, of creating a way that there's somebody he wanted. Paul had to deliver them. No one knew that Paul had to deliver them, but once Vince decided that he wanted the Dudleys, even if Paul had the money to pay them more, it was it. They were going because he owed Vince for Vince's loyalty to ECW, monetarily keeping the doors open. When you realize that it cost $25,000, you had to guarantee $25,000 to the pay-per-view company because they didn't know, because you were an unproven product, that the pay-per-view would happen after they had the mass transit incident, and there was the whole thing about will it happen or not, and
direct TV
and all those things. So you got to realize that's $300,000 a year that has to be done. So and that's got to get paid back. That's got to be paid back by the. But what happened is that they're supposed to do the figuring, the accounting, and also the first thing they were supposed to give you back. They didn't roll the 25. They wanted 25 every time, and then eventually, when they would pay you for the show, they would then also give you the 25. Well, by then, if it was financially impossible. That's why it was like every bit of T-shirt money and everything that came in went right to getting the next pay-per-view on the air. And then when the pay-per-view company realized that ECW is worth more dead to them than alive, because they could keep all the pay-per-view revenue. Once they realized that ECW didn't have a place to promote the pay-per-view, someone there did the accounting and thought, okay, we either can pay them millions, or we can pay them pennies on the dollar. And there's no chance of growing ECW because they don't have TV. So let's take the money. And I'm sure it was a lot of money. I'm sure it was millions and millions and tens of millions, probably. When you give it up, when you figure that it would take them 9 to 10 months, it would take them till October to pay the January pay-per-view. Now, most pay-per-views, they do the accumulation, they do it, and maybe it's the middle of the next month, middle of February for January, or depending on a certain number of days. But that wasn't the way their accounting worked. They held on to the money as long as possible, and gambled against ECW, and then they could play it however they wanted to, and that was sad when you realize that,
I have a fan question here who asks, do you have any stories on Joey Styles?
Oh, I love Joey. Joey is one of my most consistent holiday card I get from Joey. Still to this day. Joey was one of the most prepared people I'd ever seen. He did so much research coming in. He'd have other people do research. He'd spend time talking to the talent. I always admired Joey's ability to want to do everything he could to contribute to the storytelling of the athlete. It would have been very easy for Joey to become a caricature of himself. And of course he had catchphrases and that. But no, Joey, listen, Joey was a great guy. I always joke, and I hope if she hears this, she'll get mad at me. I always joke that the only people in the wrestling business who'd never slept with Missy Hyatt was me, Joel Gertner, and Joey Styles.
Shout out to Missy, who was.
But I love Missy. I love Missy. Yeah. But it was just, and I know, and I've driven on the road from Philly to New York with Missy. I mean, I love Missy, but Joey was exactly like you thought he was. The person you saw, that straight shooter, direct, by the book guy, and he shared that sense of values in everything he did. But his level of respect for the business, I think, is what set him apart. He didn't need to comment on what was happening. He was helping enhance the storytelling of what was happening in the ring.
Yeah, oh, definitely. What were your thoughts when you heard of the altercation that he had with John Bradshaw Layfield, where I guess from the sounds of it, he came out on the winning end?
Yes, he did. He knocked him out. From what I was not there, but when I heard that was one of those stories that spread like we heard about it. I would joke and say we heard about it 10 minutes after it happened, because people couldn't wait. Because listen, we all know that Bradshaw, bullied everybody. So everybody had a Bradshaw story. So the fact that he got his comeuppance, people couldn't wait to share the story. And I know it had so much to do with Joey as it did the fact that Bradshaw no longer could operate in this with the same mystique. I mean, he still tried, and but the mystique was gone. Mm-hmm. The idea of he's the bully, he's the locker room enforcer. No, not so much. And I mean, I was happy for Joey because it got them off his back.
Mm-hmm. Did you catch any of Joey's work in WWE? And what do you feel the major? I don't want to say differences, but do you feel he was as effective in WWE as he was in ECW?
Well, well, here's the thing. I think his work, because he was a solo commentator in ECW, he could give a more well-rounded approach. When he was doing play-by-play and he's there with someone doing color, he might have information, but he can't share it because he doesn't want to step on someone else's toes or an opportunity. And secondly, remember in WWE, you don't call the moves, and that was what he would do. He would know the name of every move and why it was effective. And that's not what his job was in WWE. That was not what anybody's. That wasn't Jim Ross's job either. It isn't anybody's job who's behind the microphone there. And that's why you're almost better off having people who aren't from the business. I look at, that's why Taz is so effective and always was, because Taz knew where that line was drawn. He could tell you what was going on with just enough expertise, but he would never cross the line between what Vince wanted. And now you see him without the shackles on in AEW, and it's great. It's great to see him be able to really achieve his potential as an announcer. I think his best work is now. I always liked Taz's work, but I think his best work is now.
Absolutely. Stephen, we seem to have burned through our hour, and I haven't hit. Yeah, I haven't hit a number of the topics that I wanted to, including.
I'll do a second hour. I don't care.
What I'm going to. What I was going to propose is maybe we could do a part 2 to talk about TNA and my kind of obsession / historically obscure interest in the hardcore road trip that happened 10 years ago now. Holy cow. In London, Ontario, that was earmarked as ECW in Canada. There's a lot that I'd like to touch on there, including your booking philosophy and then your thoughts on the current project. So if I could get you to come back in the future, that would be great. Are you up for that?
Say the word and I'm back.
That's great. Where can fans find you on social media in the interim? And do you have any plugs, sir?
God. The only thing watch MLW on July the 8th. If you're a fan of musical theater, keep your Broadway concerts that are coming your way, because on the side I produce Broadway concerts, but they're all different themed with different performers. So I don't really have exact dates to plug. But if you see my name attached and wonder if it's the same guy, it's the same guy. And I'm very fortunate to work with some of the best and most entertaining young talents. Where I work regularly with Jackie Burns, who's played the lead role of Elphaba and Wicked on Broadway more than anybody else. Brennan Lark, who just left the Broadway Company of Six, who was the last Eponine in Les Mis on Broadway. Like really the cream of the crop there. And also, obviously, I only want to work with nice people. But if you see my name and you wonder if it's a coincidence, it's not a coincidence. It's me. If it's theatrical or entertainment industry, if you see my name pop up in the crawl of an episodic television show, if you see some old stuff on Disney Channel, I did a TV series for Disney Channel. So if your kids are watching it on reruns on YouTube and my name pops up and you wonder if it's me, it's me. Other than that, but yeah, just Jack, just say the word and we'll reschedule and we'll do more.
Well, I really appreciate it, Stephen. We'll let the fans know when we have that forthcoming, and very much appreciate your time tonight, sir.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Fans, before we end the broadcast, I just want to mention, of course, following the success of the 15th anniversary Great North Wrestling event this past Saturday in Ottawa, which was extremely well received by our fans, and everyone went home happy. The next show is July the 15th in Smith Falls. Tickets are on sale right now at ticketweb.ca. We'll have them at the door, but I suggest you get them early because this is going to top the May the 6th show. We already have Ted Hart coming back to Canada for the first time in forever. He's signed to appear. He's the first of many stars, and I can tell you, I'm working right now on a huge main event in which the Blood Hunter will be one half, but the opponent will give the Blood Hunter his stiffest challenge yet. In addition to that, we have Magnum McLaren appearing again, Wes Briscoe, Canadian champion Jeremy Prophet. The list goes on and on and on. Can't forget Bin Hameen and Greek God Papadon, who tore the house down respectively in their matches in May 6th. So you're going to want to stay tuned to the Hannibal TV to get all the latest updates. I will have a special announcement from my desk, a la Todd Gordon, very soon.
Jack, I want to say one thing. I caught the clip of the incident with Magnum, and congratulations, terrific work. And I hope someday to have a chance to get up and see the product in person, because I know you have the right intention for the fans and the dedication and the continuity. And I know that you can create something really special up there, because I will say the fans up there, and we'll get into that when we talk about the other thing, are unbelievable. I know firsthand as fans and as people, and they deserve a good product.
Well, coming from you, sir, much respect, and I do appreciate that. And I will have more to say to Mr. Wes Briscoe regarding his actions on Saturday and the great Magnum McLaren and the big guy who's always in our corner. But until then, folks, thank you very much for joining us on this special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast, and we will be back with Steven in the future.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.